It's interesting that Pitt's motto for this season, for this 2024 season, is prove it. It's something that they started putting on their social medias as a hashtag, and it's kind of around the building and the facility in the South Side. Started showing up over the summer. I don't think they'd use it in the spring. I could be wrong about that. But I feel like it really started showing up over the summer on social media. You started seeing it around the facility. Coaches and players started talking about it. Either way, whether it was this summer or this spring, it really started appearing this offseason because it is the mantra and the slogan and the motto for this Pitt 2024 football team. And I bring it up now, and I think it's really interesting right now because Saturday night, more than any other game to this point, is really the prove it game for Pitt. And if they do prove it, if they prove something good, if they prove that they really are that good, or they prove how good they really are, there'll be even bigger prove it games down the road. But to this point, there is not a bigger prove it game for Pitt in 2024. And maybe this might be the biggest prove it game, at least in the regular season, of the Narduzzi era. There's a lot at stake for Pitt when the Panthers take on SMU on Saturday night at 8 p.m. in Dallas on the ACC network. There's a lot at stake for the season. There's a lot at stake as far as what we make out of what they've accomplished thus far. And while Saturday night's result is, if it goes the wrong way, if SMU wins, if Pitt doesn't pull it out, it's not going to undo anything that happened over the previous 7 games. It's not going to, change those successes or achievements or accomplishments, and it's not going to really, I don't think change your perception of what can happen in the final 4 games after this one. But there is an opportunity here, and that opportunity is to prove just how good you really are and prove just how far this team can really go. It's a huge opportunity against a ranked team on the road, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see what this team can do in that situation. Can they prove it? What do they have to prove? And, just sort of a variety of other topics along those lines. I'm thinking about the prove it thing today and what it is that Pitt exactly can prove on Saturday night, what they're going to have to do in order to prove it, and sort of what it all means in the grand scheme of the 2024 season and the Pat Narduzzi era. We're talking about proving it. We're going to prove it here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's funny when Pitt started using the prove it slogan and the prove it motto, and I think I probably pointed this out on the message boards during conversation or here on the Morning Pitt, whatever it might be. But I was reminded that prove it has been used before. I actually couldn't get many other people to remember this, people who were around at the time, players, coaches, administrators, whatever it might be. But prove it has been used before. And what I remember it being used as a slogan for Pitt was after the 2007 season. Of course, that year ended with the 13-9 game, the win over West Virginia, a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. Everybody was fired up about Pitt football. Pitt was ranked. They had LaShawn McCoy coming back and Scott McKillop coming back. They were going to get Bill Stahl, which was going to be a huge upgrade over the quarterback play in 2007. And so Pitt was riding the hype train. I mean, you talk about hype trains. There was a hype train surrounding Pitt football, certainly locally, and then around the Big East. And I think nationally, there were a lot of eyes on Pitt football, and there was a lot of hype for Pitt football. And so Dave Wanstead took the phrase, prove it, with the idea being, prove that you're as good as people are saying you are. Now, we all know what happened. The first time they stepped on a football field, they lost the Bowling Green. So what did they prove? Now, I mean, we're not going to go back through the entire 2008 season other than to say no team that I can remember was as effective at sapping momentum and killing momentum as that team was. They had all that offseason momentum, and they blew it when they lost to Bowling Green. They rattled off like 3 or 4 wins in a row, including a win on the road at South Florida, who was in the top 10 at the time. And then they came back home and lost to Rutgers. They go out and build up another winning streak, and they lose, blah, blah, blah. But it was, it was a wild time. But the idea that year with Prove It was prove that you are as good as everyone says you are. Everyone's hyping you up, but the reality is you went 5-7 last year, which is what Pitt's record was in 2007. And so prove that you really are as good as everyone's saying you are. Prove It this year was a little bit different in the offseason because it wasn't about proving that you're as good as everyone says you are. This year, Prove It for Pitt football, for Pat Narduzzi, for his players and coaches, Prove It was about prove that you're not as bad as you were last year. Prove that you are better than a 3-9 team. You all believe you are better than a 3-9 team. You're all talking about being better than a 3-9 team. Go out and prove that you are better than a 3-9 team. And so that was what Prove It meant in the offseason. Now, 7 games into the season, approaching game number 8, with Pitt ranked in the top 20, 7-0, and facing a 1-loss top 20 team on the road Saturday night, Prove It means something different once again. Now, it's not about proving that you're as good as everyone says you are, because I don't know if people are really saying how good Pitt is. It's not about proving that you're better than last season or proving you're not as bad as people say you are, because obviously they've already erased that. They've more than doubled their win total from a year ago and avenged 4 of their losses from a year ago. How about this little stat, little factoid? I posted this yesterday. It's from our friend Sam Shulo, Pitt historian. By defeating Cincinnati, West Virginia, North Carolina, and Syracuse, Pitt has now avenged 4 losses from last season. And I think that's all they could. I think those are the only repeat opponents that they lost to last year who they play again this year. Obviously, they played Louisville and Boston College again, but those were 2 of the teams that Pitt beat. They don't play Florida State or Notre Dame or Wake Forest or Duke again this year. And so they had 4 opportunities for so-called revenge games, and they've gotten those 4 revenge games. And it's actually the most revenge games, if you consider a win against a team you lost to the year before, it's the most revenge games, wins in revenge games, since 2015, Pat Narduzzi's first year. And the last time they had 4 revenge games before that was 1997, Walt Harris's first year, which is sort of interesting how that lines up. I think a big part of that is because, look, you have more opportunities for revenge games when you lose more games the previous year. So 1996, the year before Walt Harris, they were like 4-7, you know? 2014, the year before Pat Narduzzi, they were like 6-7. Obviously, last year they were 3-9. So that all, you have more opportunities, right? To get a revenge win when you have a lot of losses. So anyway, they've taken care of all that business. So Prove It now for this Pitt team is not about proving that you're as good as everyone says you are. It's not about proving that you're much better than you looked a year ago. Prove It now is about proving where you truly belong in college football at this point. We've talked a lot about the rankings. We've talked a lot about the polls, and yeah, we'll get the caveat out of the way. All of these things will take care of themselves, right? I mean, we keep saying this. When the polls came out on Sunday, and Pitt had only climbed 1 spot to number 18, tying for the lowest ranking among a 7-0 power conference team since 2000, which is just when I stopped looking. I didn't go back beyond 2000 to check. But there was only one other power conference team that's been 7-0 and ranked as low as number 18. That was Rutgers in 2012. And we talked a lot about that. And the general conclusion, or an important thing to keep in mind, is all of these things will take care of themselves. If you keep winning, you'll keep climbing the rankings. You may not be happy to be a 7-0 team at number 18, but and if they win on Saturday and they only climb 1 spot, and we'll talk about this in a second, but if that's what happens, you might not be happy to be an 8-0 team at number 17, but if you keep building wins, you will climb. And so that'll take care of itself. That said, there are obviously questions about this Pitt team. I think from the outside looking in, there are questions about this Pitt team. And I think, if you're an AP poll voter, there's either the guys who just look at, the records and the box scores and who you played, and then they just go with it. And then there's ones who look closer. And I think you can see where both sides are coming from if they have skepticism about this Pitt team. Because the ones who just look at the box scores and the records say, okay, you're 7-0, but who did you play? For an unranked team that went 3-9 last year, and so started off pretty low near the bottom of the pile and just sort of slowly inching up as they continue to win. And then for the guys who look closer, they say, okay, you're 7-0. I'm not as concerned about the fact that you didn't play anybody or you don't have a great schedule or whatever it is, but I'm looking at your offense really kind of falling off in the last 2 games. And, that concerns me. And so I'm ranking you with skepticism. So you kind of see where that skepticism comes from. So what this game on Saturday night provides as a game against a top 20 team on the road is an opportunity to prove how good you really are. Now, it's not an opportunity for Pitt to prove that it is a good team, because you know what? Pitt is a good team. Pitt is a good team. I don't think you get to 7-0 without being a good team. A lot of times when I pointed out that 2012 Rutgers team that was 7-0 and ranked number 18, people are like, well, they went on to lose this, and they finished 9, blah, blah. Well, they still finished 9-4. And if you're 9-4, you're a good team. Okay? You might have had a disappointing finish, and if you started 7-0 and you finished 9-4, that is disappointing because you went 2-4 over the final 6 games, but you're a good team. Pitt is a good team. That, to me, is an established baseline. Unless they lose out, and they're not going to lose out, and you know why they're not going to lose out? Because they're a good team. So you have that established baseline of a good team. The opportunity that is there for Pitt now is to prove how good they are. Okay? The opportunity for Pitt now is to prove not that it is a good team, but for it to prove where it really stacks up among the caliber of good teams. And this game on Saturday night is a huge opportunity to do just that. Again, with a ranked opponent on the road. A primetime game that may be on ACC Network, but people are going to be able to see it. It's going to be one of the premier games. And people are going to be watching. And they're going to be able to see how good Pitt is. I'm not going to say or isn't. It's just a question of, well, okay, do they belong to be ranked in the top 15? Or do they belong to be ranked maybe lower, maybe out? What is this Pitt team? Who is this Pitt team? Their biggest challenge of the season yet, their biggest test, how do they do it? Because when you talk about the polls, they're not going to get any help around them. They're unlikely to get any help around them. I mean, Indiana is at Michigan State, who I think is like 4-4. Indiana's number 13. Alabama's number 14, and LSU is number 16. They're both off this weekend, so nothing's going to happen there. Boise State is number 15. They host San Diego State, who's 3-4, and Kansas State is number 17. They're at Houston, who is 3-5. So you're unlike, I mean, barring an upset, you're unlikely to get any help there, particularly when out of the 5 teams ranked ahead of you, 2 of them are off this weekend. But I think that presents an opportunity as well. Like Alabama, who is a 2-loss team and ranked number 14, they're not going to go out and blow anybody out and look amazing this weekend. You know, LSU, who's number 16, is not going to go out there and blow anybody out and look amazing this weekend. They're just idle. They're dormant. And so you have an opportunity, if you're Pitt, to go out, put in an impressive performance, get to 8-0, and make the case for why you should leapfrog those 2-loss SEC teams. Because, like, I would contend that if there's an 8-0 team from a power conference, they should not be ranked below a 2-loss team. I don't care if they're from the SEC or the Big Ten or whatever conference it might be. I think if you're a voter with any kind of pride, dignity, or conscience, you can't rank an 8-0 power conference team below a 2-loss team. Now, I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves and talking about what happens in the event of a win, but I'm trying to say what's on the table here for Pitt is that opportunity to prove who they are. And it's going to be a great test. I think this SMU team is a really interesting test for Pitt. Number 1 rush offense in the conference, facing the number 2 rush defense in the conference. Flip side, SMU has the number 1 rush defense in the conference. So SMU, number 4 scoring defense in the ACC, number 4 total defense in the ACC, number 1 rush defense in the ACC, number 11 pass defense in the ACC. They're number 2 in interceptions, number 4 in forced fumbles, number 8 in sacks. They're a solid defense that's likely going to sell out to stop Desmond Reed because that's kind of what they've done. And they've been really good at stopping the run this year. Which means it's going to be on Eli Holstein. Which means Eli Holstein is going to have to do better at protecting the ball than he did against Cal, and do better at finding opportunities for his playmakers than he did against Syracuse. And again, the Syracuse game, I still sort of, I don't want to just wave the hand. I don't want to just take it with a grain of salt, but 11 of 15, 15 attempts is just not a lot. But on those 15 attempts, it's not like he was making big plays. I still really like the touchdown passes. I thought he had some nice throws. To Gavin Bartholomew had a nice play. There were good things to take out of that. I thought he played better against Syracuse than he did against Cal, but he needs to play better than both of those games on Saturday night at SMU. And I think it's a really interesting test as a result for Pitt's offense and Pitt's defense, because Pitt's defense is going to be tested as well. This is an RPO team. We know the success that RPOs have had against this Pitt defensive structure in the past, but it's gotten better. Everybody has nightmares of Western Michigan, but that was now 3 years ago. And I think since then, we haven't seen an RPO team really have that kind of success against Pitt. Even you go later in that season, Wake Forest, despite the sort of novelty of their slow mesh, was an RPO team, and Pitt really kind of shut that down after the first quarter. They really took care of business in that game. And I think they've been generally pretty good against RPOs over the last 3 years since then, since that Western Michigan game. But this is a good offense. They run it well. Kevin Jennings is pretty strong. Their running backs are good. Brashard Smith is one of the best running backs in the ACC. And that makes it more dangerous. It's harder, I think, to play those read option plays and those RPO plays when you've got such a dangerous running back like Smith. And what's really interesting to me, and I talked about this earlier in the week, is the way SMU attacks the perimeter. I mean, I feel like it's a matchup of good versus good, where SMU is really good at going outside the tackles. Like the three leading rushers for SMU are Brashard Smith, the running back, Kevin Jennings, the quarterback, and LJ Johnson Jr., the running back. The three of them combined, according to Pro Football Focus, have run outside the tackles almost 100 times, 99 times, and they're averaging 6.5 yards per carry outside the tackles. Perimeter runs, wide runs, outside, tosses, pitches, whatever it might be. Even a sweep. I think Smith ran a sweep at one point. Like, this is where they're good. Now, flip side, that's where Pitt is good. The outside linebackers. You know, if you want to run outside, you're going to have to get past Kyle Lewis or Rasheem Biles or Braylon Lovelace or Jordan Bass, who I think played well against Syracuse. You're going to have to get past those guys. You're going to have to get past Donovan McMillan and Javon McIntyre. I think Pitt perimeter, right outside the tackles, is pretty good that defensively. And obviously those guys, those outside linebackers, are coming off, one of the best games we've seen from a group of linebackers. And I shouldn't just say the outside linebackers. Brandon George played really well too. Pitt's linebackers are coming off the best game we've seen from a group of linebackers at Pitt in a long, long time. Certainly longer than I can remember for an entire group, how they played against Syracuse. And so you've got maybe the strength of Pitt's defense in the linebackers and extended a little bit back to the safeties, going against, an area where SMU really excels. I think, you're looking at about 650 rushing yards for SMU coming on runs outside the tackle, runs to the perimeter. They have about 1,600 rushing yards as a team this year. So you're not quite looking at half of their yards, but they make a lot of plays out there. They get outside and rush and challenge you in that way. They also like to throw screens. Kevin Jennings, screens and perimeter passes. So Kevin Jennings passes outside the numbers, 10 yards and in, and even behind the line of scrimmage this year. He's 22 of 26. It's 85%, 161 yards. He's averaging 6.2 yards per attempt. That's not a ton, 6 yards per attempt, but if you put that together with those runs outside the tackles, and you're talking about getting 6 to 6.5 yards every time you either run outside the tackles or throw the ball out to the flat or screens, like, now you've got a reliable source of offensive production that is chipping away 6.5 yards every time it happens. This is where SMU likes to make their money. You saw them do it a lot against Duke. They tried to attack the perimeter. Pitt's outside linebackers are going to be tested. If they can be up to the challenge And like Randy Bates said on Tuesday, they've got to make one-on-one tackles. They're going to have to make plays out there. If they're up to the challenge, then I think they're going to do well against this defense or against this offense. They've also got to keep an eye on those RPOs and the slants, those passes that have, I think, caused a lot of Pitt defenses in the past a lot of trouble, although not as much in recent years. So I think I think it's a really interesting test. I think it's a really interesting challenge. And for a game where Pitt has a huge opportunity to make a statement on a national stage, to truly prove it, I think it's a great matchup to show what they're made of. Not necessarily a great matchup because I think it favors Pitt. I don't know if it favors Pitt or SMU. I think there are elements of each team, offense and defense, that sort of favor that unit, but nothing overwhelmingly favors one or the other, at least I think as you look at it going in. And so I think it's a really, really compelling matchup and a great opportunity for Pitt. In what is, I think, to this point, and I think it's important to make that element, it's important to emphasize that I'm talking to this point, this might be the biggest prove-it game of the Narduzzi era. At least in the regular season. You want to say the ACC championship game was a bigger prove-it game, a bigger opportunity for Pitt to prove who it is and where it stands. The ACC championship game would rank pretty high, but there's not a lot of other games. I think like North Carolina in 2015 was a prove-it game, and if we go back a little bit, Pitt was 6-1 at that point. They had been in the polls for 2 weeks. They moved in at 25, and they won at Syracuse. And then 5 days later, they had to host North Carolina on a Thursday night. Pitt was number 23, but it was a Thursday night game, a primetime game. Pitt's ranked. They're 6-1. I mean, this is an opportunity to make a statement. Now, they fell short, and they lost that game, but that was a big prove-it game. I would say the Virginia game in 2018 was a prove-it game, at least for Pitt fans. I don't know how much play it got even locally or nationally, but at that point, Pitt had... If you remember in the 2018 season, I mean, there's the disaster against Penn State, the 51-6 game. They lose at Carolina. They lose at UCF. I want to bring that season up here just to have the records in front of me. It's just disastrous, right? They start the season 2-3, and then they come home and they play Syracuse. Huge game. I thought Syracuse was ranked, but it doesn't say it here in the on the Wikipedia page. And they beat Syracuse, right? So now they're 3-3. And then they go out to Notre Dame, play a really tough game, looked pretty good in a loss. It was one of the more encouraging losses you're going to see. And then they come back home and they beat Duke in a pretty wild one. And now they're 4-4, but they're also 3-1 in the ACC, and they actually look like they might be pretty good. They look like they bounced back from the disastrous start to the season, and they might be pretty good. And so they go on a Friday night to Virginia, who was ranked at the time, to play a primetime nationally televised game. And I think that was a big prove-it game for Pitt. Maybe not as big as the Carolina game in 2015, certainly not as big as this game on Saturday or the one other game I'm going to mention, but a pretty big prove-it game for Pitt, and obviously they win that one. They beat Virginia Tech the next week, and then they win at Wake Forest to clinch the Coastal. I think that was a big prove-it game, that Friday night game against Virginia. And then, probably the second biggest prove-it game, regular season game, under Narduzzi, was the Clemson game in 2021. At that point, I think Pitt had moved into the polls at number 23. They were 5-1 overall. They had rebounded from the Western Michigan loss to beat New Hampshire, crush New Hampshire, and then beat up on Georgia Tech, beat Virginia Tech really soundly. They were number 23 in the rankings, and they have Clemson coming in for an afternoon game at Heinz Field, as it was at that point. And an opportunity to really say, yeah, Western Michigan happened, that sucked, but we're better than that. And they came out and they said just that and climbed up to number 17 as a result of that win. A pretty big jump to go 6 spots. They proved who they were. Pay no attention to what happened in the next week when they lost to Miami. They proved who they were. And that's the opportunity that's here. I don't think any of those games, Clemson in 21, Virginia in 18, Carolina in 15, again, we'll set the ACC championship game aside. I don't think any of those games carry the weight or the stakes of this SMU game on Saturday night. Getting to 8-0. making your case for a climb into the top 15. It's all on the table. Chance to prove it. I can't wait. I'm really excited. I was excited for the Thursday night game against Syracuse. I'm really excited to see what Pitt is able to do on Saturday night. My house is going to be so clean by the time that game starts because I'm going to be stir crazy all day, just sitting around waiting for that game to kick off. We're going to have to find lots of things to do to occupy ourselves on Saturday, waiting until 8 o'clock for that game. Of course, we'll be live after the game for the post-game show. We'll start pretty much as soon as the game ends. We're not waiting around. It's a road game, so we're not trying to get home from the stadium or anything like that. We'll go live pretty quick after the game ends and, start talking about it, and it'll be right here. The post-game show will be right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, the weekly live stream like we did last night, me and Jim Hammett, and then, of course, our post-game shows right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Get all your Pitt coverage at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Never miss anything going on with Pitt football, basketball, or recruiting. And, of course, message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans all day, every day, including during the game on Saturday night, and our always lively, never boring official game thread. All right, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. Like and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And I think that's about it. We got our mailbag edition tomorrow, so there's still time to get your questions in on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And we always look forward to those. Those are fun episodes to do with the mailbag. So that'll be fun tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. Hope you've had a great week so far. We're almost to the end of it, folks. Enjoy your Thursday, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.